Knowing your Beethoven interpreters can significantly affect your experience and relationship with his music. Unlike romantic and even baroque works, there seems to be less individuality within performing Beethoven. Many recordings are just rehashing of the status quo, with little more to add. So I'm gonna suggest whom I believe are the top 15 recorded Beethoven pianists for some reason or another. This ranking is just my personal opinion. There are many greats with incredible interpretations whom I haven't included simply because they haven't recorded enough Beethoven. Before I go into the top 15, there's a few honorable mentions that deserve to be on the list. I'll start with Erich Heitzig. He's not really known as being a Beethoven specialist, and quite appallingly not so well known in general as he should be. Heitzig is a disciple of Cortot, who, as you all well know, is the pinnacle of free romantic style playing and individuality of performance. He combines the best from Cortot in his style and philosophy of playing, along with the raised standards of modern piano technique. One would naturally expect to hear the romanticism in his Chopin, and it is there in abundance, yet it also seeps completely through into his Beethoven. It's almost as if like Chopin or someone from his era is playing Beethoven. Heitzig takes an operatic approach as opposed to a symphonic approach on the piano. His attention to and treatment of notes through layers of voicing is a marvel to behold. There is always a bel canto aspect to his playing, along with a constant surprise element of inner voices being brought out like you've never heard before. I truly can't understand why he isn't as famous as he should be. Even his released albums, though lucky we are to have them, are of a lower audio quality considering the age in which they were recorded. Then I have to mention Katsaris, an often overlooked pianist when it comes to discussing great Beethoven interpreters, known as the man with a brain in each finger. This rare superhuman quality of extreme finger independence is utilized to the maximum in his Beethoven recordings. His complete set of 32 sonatas, as well as his extensive collection of Beethoven's other piano works, are nothing short of immaculate. Even though I would have loved to share an excerpt from the sonatas, it would be a crime not to share this clip from Beethoven's Third Symphony arranged for solo piano by Franz Liszt. Katsaris is popular for being the guy who brings out inner voices, but there's another quality he has that's also just as impressive: the way he can manipulate color. Creating a sound is physics. You strike a key, which then hammers a string that resonates the sound. There's no other way about it. Yet Katsaris seems to have an ability to manipulate that sound. We all know David Blaine or Copperfield don't do real magic. They create illusions that trick the mind into believing that they're real. I believe this is what Katsaris does, especially with his Beethoven, as he can strike the same key twice yet give us the illusion of a different orchestral sound. Even with the sonatas, you can hear the sound of the cellos, double bass, woodwind, strings, percussion, all within 88 piano keys. He also has a solo arrangement of the great Emperor Piano Concerto with all its orchestral glory and pianistic virtuosity without sacrificing anything of its greatness to the limitation of the piano. For the last honorable mention, I have Stephen Kovacevic, whose Beethoven is raw, organic, and completely unfiltered. There's nothing mannered or self-conscious in his playing. His approach is one of instinct rather than calculation. He does not perform Beethoven so much as inhabit him. His recordings of the sonatas and concertos are among the most visceral and emotionally charged you will find. He's not afraid to take risks, to let the music dictate where it wants to go. His dynamic range is staggering, whispering pianissimos that feel like secrets being shared, followed by earth-shattering fortissimos that hit like a tidal wave. Kovacevic's Beethoven is deeply human, flawed, passionate, unpredictable, and utterly compelling. His recordings of the Emperor Concerto and the late sonatas especially stand among the finest ever made. For those who want a Beethoven that feels spontaneous and alive, Kovacevic, the top 15, we have Fazil Say, who has a reputation of being a Beethoven specialist. We're going to listen to the opening of the Tempest Sonata as an example of his out-of-the-box thinking. There's the tempo marking of largo versus an arpeggiated chord. What usually happens is that pianists play each note of the chord largo, sacrificing the essence of the arpeggiated chord for tempo. Sai cunningly avoids sacrificing either of these and rolls the arpeggio out as asked for, while maintaining the largo by holding the phrase out longer. He's recorded the entirety of the 32 sonatas to massive critical acclaim. His scholarly insights into Beethoven's works reflect fully in his recordings. Despite his knowledge within Beethoven, his recordings are far from a rehashing of the status quo. His approach is full of interesting new ideas that give the listener a new insight into these legendary sonatas. I've always felt that the playing of a composer-pianist has more interpretive value than that of a non-composer, simply because it's easier for a composer to get inside the mind of another composer. This rings true with Say, as he has undertaken a project to orchestrate Beethoven sonatas and has already done so for a few of them. His orchestrations just show how he's able to visualize Beethoven's symphonic piano writing and interpret them accordingly. Truly a Beethoven interpreter that has left his mark in the genre. At 14th, we have Wilhelm Backhaus. If Beethoven's music is a towering monument of structure and form, then Wilhelm Backhaus is the stonemason who carves it with absolute precision. His Beethoven is granite solid, unshakable in its structural integrity, and devoid of any excessive sentimentality. He does not indulge in rubato, nor does he impose any artificial drama onto the music. He simply allows Beethoven to speak with pure, unembellished authority. Backhaus was a pioneer, one of the first pianists to record the complete Beethoven sonatas twice, and his interpretations have a timeless, almost elemental quality. His approach is stoic, noble, and architecturally perfect, every note placed with an unerring sense of purpose. Yet, despite his reputation for intellectual detachment, there is an undeniable grandeur and power to his playing. His Hammerklavier is ferocious, a relentless juggernaut of sound and structure. His Waldstein is played with crystalline clarity, with not a single phrase out of place. Even in the slow movements, there is a sense of inevitability. He does not emote in the way that others might, but instead allows Beethoven's phrasing and the harmonic progressions to carry their own weight. If you're looking for a Beethoven interpreter who strips away all unnecessary ornamentation and delivers the pure essence of the music, Backhaus is your man. Here's an excerpt from an alternative cadenza that's gone extinct nowadays from Beethoven's Third Piano Concerto. number 13, we have Wilhelm Kempff. Kempff was my gateway into the world of Beethoven sonatas. There was something so captivating about his thousand-yard stare, implying that he's merely a messenger relaying the will of Beethoven. Kempff would be my recommendation to anyone who hasn't been exposed to Beethoven sonatas. His recordings are ideal for first listen and introduction to this rich world of music. His relatively slower tempi, fluidity of playing, as well as the crisp clarity of phrasing on both hands make his recordings the best choice to develop a foundation to build on. There are many interpretive facets that may come out from Beethoven's music. At face value, the most common element extracted from Pianists is a melodramatic, passionate rage. Kempff, however, doesn't reflect that side of the coin, and rather, he exposes the lyricism and poetry hiding in plain sight. Given that his recordings are considered historical, I feel like we get a good bargain as the audio quality is relatively decent for that time and age. At 12, we have Rudolf Serkin. Serkin's Beethoven is what happens when sheer, unfiltered intensity meets absolute technical authority. There is nothing reserved or pretty about his playing. He goes straight for the jugular, attacking Beethoven's music with a ferocity that makes every performance feel like a matter of life and death. Listen to his Appassionata and you'll hear a man possessed, pushing the tempo and dynamics to their breaking point, yet never losing control. His Hammerklavier is a terrifying display of raw power and intellect, while his Emperor Concerto remains one of the most commanding ever recorded. But Serkin wasn't just about brute force. His slow movements are deeply introspective, almost painfully vulnerable, as if Beethoven's soul is laid bare through his fingers. He understood that Beethoven was not just about heroism and defiance. There was also an immense tenderness beneath the surface. Serkin's Beethoven is not for the faint of heart. It's urgent, electrifying, and utterly uncompromising. Here's what Gold has to say about his fourth piano concerto.
But it is, in my opinion, incomparably his most compelling statement of it. In fact, it's one of the few realizations of this work that I've heard in which the rather elusive qualities of the piano solo part are not treated as an end in themselves. They're made part of a genuinely symphonic conception. This is not an easy thing to do, but it is, I think, the way in which it should be done. Rudolf Serkin does it superbly, and I commend his recording to you.
At 11th, we have Solomon. One of the greatest tragedies of the piano world was Solomon's premature end as a performer due to a stroke at the height of his career. His Beethoven recordings, however, remained some of the most noble, refined, and deeply poetic ever set to tape. Solomon was not a pianist who sought to impose himself on the music. He was a sculptor, chiseling his way at each phrase with infinite patience, revealing Beethoven in his purest form. There is structural perfection to his playing, an architectural sense of balance where every note carries weight and purpose. His slow movements are among the most transcendent you'll ever hear. His Adagio from Opus 110 is the very definition of inner peace, while his Opus 111 is a meditation on eternity. And yet, he never sacrifices Beethoven's fire. His Hammerklavier has a forward-driving intensity that feels unstoppable. For those who want a Beethoven that is both deeply intellectual and emotionally fulfilling, Solomon is essential listening. 10th, we have Friedrich Gulda, who was a pianist that simply refused to be put in a box, equally at home in jazz clubs as he was in the concert hall. His Beethoven is a fascinating blend of intellectual precision and improvisatory freedom. His recordings of the sonatas are often overlooked, but they reveal a Beethoven that is unpredictable, daring, and full of life. Gulda does not treat Beethoven as a museum piece. His playing is alive, constantly shifting in color and mood, as if discovering the music anew with each performance, and yet there is no sense of indulgence. Gulda's approach is deeply faithful to the score. He possesses a rhythmic clarity and structural awareness that keeps even his most spontaneous moments grounded. His Appassionata and Opus 111 in particular are must-listens. For those who love Beethoven but crave something fresh and unpredictable, Gulda is a pianist you didn't know you needed. Ninth place, we have Glenn Gould. I know some will question his inclusion on this list and even question my musical taste, but hear me out for a minute. We all know Beethoven was the ultimate rebel, the voice of anti-establishment and musical dissent. He literally transformed music by going against the system and doing his own thing. That's why he's famous as he is today. Yet, ironically, a century after his death, the system he broke out of absorbed what he did and jailed his ideas into traditions and rules you cannot break, missing the point entirely. While Gould was known as a Bach specialist, he was also an unhinged, based musical menace whose entire raison d'etre revolved around rebelling against the status quo. Sure, his interpretations of Beethoven can be hit or miss, like his Appassionata, which was a catastrophe, but those that do hit hard. Whether a pensive passage or an astronomically fast one, Gould does not yield a metronomical inch to rubato, ironically resulting in a more universal, matter-of-factly type of expression. What's interesting is that Beethoven ushered in the concept of romanticism in music, leading to what Gould would consider as hyper-romanticism, resulting in his fanatical antitheses to that concept, which, ironically, by definition, is an act of romanticism. His alternative interpretations helped me learn a lot about Beethoven, and I remember finally understanding Opus 111 when I first heard him play it, and how the second movement reduced me to tears. In eighth place, I have Maria Grimberg, a hidden gem of the Soviet piano tradition. Grimberg is one of the greatest Beethoven interpreters that almost nobody talks about. Her cycle of the 32 sonatas is an absolute revelation, raw, powerful, and emotionally uninhibited. Grimberg's Beethoven is intensely lyrical, yet filled with an undercurrent of tension that never quite lets the listener relax. She has an uncanny ability to balance phrasing, articulation, and dynamics in a way that gives her playing both clarity and dramatic weight. There is nothing clinical or detached about her Beethoven. It breathes, it sighs, it roars. Her Opus 111 in particular is a thing of legend. She brings out the hypnotic quality of the Arietta's variations in a way that makes time feel like it's standing still. And yet, when Beethoven calls for power, Grimberg delivers it with a volcanic energy that rivals the greats. For those looking to explore Beethoven outside the usual names, Grimberg is a pianist that demands attention. In seventh place, we have Annie Fischer. If there's one word that defines Fischer's Beethoven, it's inevitability. Her playing carries an almost supernatural sense of direction. Each note, phrase, and movement unfolds as if dictated by fate itself. Unlike pianists who approach Beethoven with a sense of analytical detachment or heavy-handed drama, Fischer delivers interpretations that feel completely natural, as if she's discovering the music in real time alongside the listener. Her cycle of the 32 sonatas was never released in her lifetime because she was a relentless perfectionist, constantly re-recording pieces in search of a higher truth. Yet despite her own misgivings, the recordings we have capture a Beethoven that is both deeply expressive and profoundly structured. There is no sense of artifice or ego in her playing, only the raw, unfiltered essence of Beethoven's music. Her Waltz-Theme is a storm of nervous energy, her Appassionata a tempest of fire and poetry, and her Opus 111 a journey into the unknown. The sound quality might not be the most polished, but her performances are among the most alive you will ever hear. The number 6 spot goes to Sviatoslav Richter. While he may have not recorded a complete set of sonatas and wasn't really known as a Beethoven specialist, Richter was a generalist, a jack of all trades and master of all. His philosophy of playing translates very well with Beethoven, and his intentions of playing the score as it is, ironically, yield some individualistic results. Even though his recordings are of a crude, lower quality and mostly live, his Beethoven is always played with raw, unfiltered power that's rhythmically driven or dynamically expressed. Outside of the sonatas, his Diabelli variations are also incredibly insightful and show a very deep understanding of the legendary composer. First, let's listen to how he crafts a phrase using rhythm in the second movement of Opus 111. Now, let's hear the coda of the first movement of Appassionata. And before we let him go, let's listen to the coda of the third movement of the same sonata. Here, Richter is a man possessed. number 5, we have Eve Not. Beethoven was a composer of struggle, of humanity grappling with fate, and Not's recordings capture this elemental battle like few others. His playing is rugged, raw, and completely unpolished in the best possible way. There is no excessive refinement, no effort to make Beethoven beautiful in the conventional sense. Instead, his performances are visceral, at times almost brutal, revealing the primal force that lies at the heart of Beethoven's music. If you listen to the late sonatas, you will not find shimmering delicacy or poetic wistfulness. What you will find is a sense of someone tearing the music from the depths of their soul, as if engaged in a battle with the instrument itself. His technique might not be pristine by modern standards, but the sheer weight of his interpretations make up for any imperfections. Nat's Beethoven is for those who want to hear the struggle in the music, for those who believe that Beethoven's piano works are not just compositions, but statements of defiance against fate itself. Number 4, we have Claudio Arrau. Arrau's playing exemplifies and defines beauty. If you throw at him a barrage of random notes to play on the piano, he's still going to create a beautiful soundscape with them. His signature aesthetic sound applies to any composer he plays. With Beethoven, that sound becomes transcendental. Arrau's technical mastery is always in complete service to beauty, to extract it in as many ways as possible without sacrificing a shred of the composer's intent. His fingers burrow deep into the keys to create a rich, full, majestic sound, all the while having control over a complete dynamic range. Beyond his dominion over color and tone, how he immaculately paints with sound, or his Midas touch, Arrau has the greatest sounding arpeggios and scales I have ever heard. They gurgitate smoothly like a flowing waterfall. His knowledge, deep understanding of Beethoven and his philosophy reflect directly into the way he plays music. Arrau was a fourth-generation musical descendant of Beethoven, taught by Liszt's student Martin Krauss. His recordings of the 32 sonatas are a true experience of a lifetime. Arrau views Beethoven as a titan, as a timeless composer who will always be relatable to humans and their struggle. This is what he has to say about the 32 sonatas.
Like all culture heroes, Beethoven exemplifies in his creative output all of the spiritual and psychic battles of the mythic hero. The hero who is given superhuman tasks to overcome, and who, after untold struggles, truly blooded but undaunted, emerges the victor. And as in the case of the greatest creative giants, Shakespeare, Michelangelo, Rembrandt, Goethe, finally attains the highest state of self-realization and illumination. This is especially true of Beethoven, who struggled creatively, possibly on a more titanic scale than even Michelangelo, in the sense that he wrought his works into shape with an inexhaustible inner sense and vision of perfection and completion. In the end, he reached a mystical union with the Godhead, as it were, and on a higher plane of transcendence than almost anyone else in the history of Western art. Nowhere throughout his work is this struggle and final transcendence seen so clearly than in the body of the complete 32 piano sonatas, where Beethoven's creative development may be perceived in one unbroken line of continuous evolution from the forthright first sonatas of Opus 2 to the other-world metaphysical language of Opus 111.
I'm going to attach an excerpt from a poem by Gibran Gibran about beauty as we hear a raw play. In third place, we have Artur Schnabel, Schnabel can be credited as the man who introduced the world to Beethoven. He is the consensus-crowned king of Beethoven. His teacher was a student of Czerny, who was Beethoven's student, who also played with Mozart's son, Franz Xavier. Schnabel was often in the presence of the great Brahms himself when he was younger. In 1935, HMV invested huge amounts of money on the very first set of complete Beethoven sonatas to be recorded by Schnabel. His interpretations of these sonatas became the golden standard and set the status quo of what a Beethoven sonata should sound like. Schnabel gave the world and pianists the sound of Beethoven. When Gould was asked why his interpretations were so eccentric, he argued that as long as Schnabel's recordings are in existence, he has to do something different to survive. Schnabel may not have the best technique, relatively speaking, but his spirit and understanding of these works are what made him the chosen prophet. His playing of the slow movements is extraordinary. Rachmaninoff called him the great adagio pianist. He's number 3 on this list solely because the audio quality of his recordings do not survive the test of time. The static, crackles, and lack of depth give it a muffled sound, as if you're on the top floor hearing someone play in the basement. I know some might object to his placement at 3, but I believe in this age there are similar or even better interpretations with a much better audio quality. What do you think? Second place goes to Alfred Brendel, whom I absolutely adore as a pianist, personality, and as an intellectual figure. This is a man who created his own career at his own pace, using the repertoire of his choosing outside of the traditional system that pianists go through. This is a man who chose to spend decades of his life deep within the trenches of the then unpopular Liszt and Schubert repertoire. That in itself would naturally produce a heightened sense of melody attained from Schubert, along with a ridiculous technique from playing Liszt. Unlike many other virtuosos, Brendel takes his sweet time when learning a piece. Not only does he zealously study the score, but he also embeds himself in any literature even remotely related to what he's playing. His playing is often described as being cerebral, and you'll notice how that's very true as soon as you hear him play. If you know how to listen, Brendel's recordings will reap many rewards. What he does is incredibly subtle. His treatment of the music is on a microscopic level. Every single note he touches is accounted for. Take this example from the third movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Notice how he goes through almost every dynamic range while he's trilling. You're not going to notice many pianists that do that. even the notes within a chord each have a separate dynamic and voicing. On a macroscopic level, Brendel can clump together a flurry of notes and phrase them in a certain way that could bring out a hidden melodic line or a new statement. His Beethoven sonatas are filled with these quirks that are a direct reflection of his personality. The reason why he's number 2 is because his recording of the sonatas are absolutely reliable as a reference source, with perfect audio quality, making them a great choice for a new listener, while at the same time they're full of wonderful surprises and endless depth to the seasoned listener. If you don't know who's at number 1 by now, then you need to rearrange your Beethoven playlists to include this master. For the past 18 years or so, Beethoven's piano works have been integral to my existence and joy in life. Listening to his works being performed by different artists is a serious hobby of mine. Out of the myriad of different interpreters I've come across, there's absolutely none that come close to capturing what I believe is the spirit of Beethoven than Emil Jalel's. Jalel's translation of Beethoven's music hits a rare mythological sweet spot. The perfect balance of technique, aggression, poetry, tempo, rhythm, and dynamics anyone can find. The crown jewel of the famous Neuhaus school of Russian pianism. Unlike the other great interpreters, with Jalel's you don't feel that his personality or philosophy are injected within the music. Rather, he convinces you into thinking that this is the truth of Beethoven, and plays it so in a matter-of-factly manner. His left hand alone is suffice to place him at number 1. The audio quality of his Deutsche Grammophon recordings are perfect, where the character of every note is discernible. Despite the tragedy of him not recording the final and what I believe is the most important sonata, I believe everything else he recorded is truly the most representative portrait of the great titan that is Beethoven. What are your thoughts? Do you agree, disagree? Am I gonna get grilled in the comments for this? If you enjoy this kind of content and would like to see more, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon button, and I'll see you in the next one.